Hey everyone, Coach Sage Canaday of SageRunning.com here with another training talk. Today we're going to talk about the top voted comments on my last video, call for comments on hearing about different courses or events that you guys voted on and wanted to hear about. I believe the top votes were the Comrades Ultra Marathon in South Africa, and then the Boston Marathon, as well as then the Pikes Peak Marathon Ascent. I'm probably going to just talk about Comrades and Boston in this video, and I will also say that I have done a video on how to run the Boston Marathon, in my opinion at least, in previous years. I'll put the link to the video in the description below, how to run Boston. And we also have training plans at SageRunning.com, Coach Andy and I formed, for if you've already qualified for the Boston Marathon, how to approach a hilly marathon course like that, as well as if you're trying to get a BQ qualifying time or run under 3 hours. People have had a lot of success with that type of plan. So business plug, let's get started. Comrades Ultra Marathon, the greatest ultra marathon in the world. A lot of people would say it's the most competitive, it's the largest, it's got the biggest history, right? Going on 100 years, it's incredible. There's like 20,000 runners that enter this 55-mile race, 89-kilometer race. And it's unique because it alternates direction. It's all on pavement too, all on tarmac, all paved roads, and it's hilly. It's got some rolling hills, but they alternate direction generally every other year. They've done some things whereas like this year is a downhill year and the next year is going to be a downhill year, I believe. So 2 down years in a row, but they alternate directions usually every other year, whether it's a net uphill or a net downhill year, and you're going between Durban or Pietermaritzburg, right? So the years I've done it, and again, I have not been happy with how I've run at Comrades. I've run the up years twice, in 2015 and then last year in 2019. Net uphill did not do very well, especially last year. I really crashed and burned. So I'm not sure if I'm qualified to give great advice. There's plenty of people that have done the event on consecutive years, up and down. There's people that have done, 10 or more. You get special medals if you finish under certain times or you do so many consecutive years. They say to get the full experience you got to do a downhill year. I'm gonna just try to wait to master the uphill year first. But 2015, my first time there, was my best run in the up year. I was the 15th guy across the line, ended up, I say I get 13th place though, because 2 guys in the top 10 did test positive on race day drug tests. It's not always a clean race. There's a lot of money on the line too, I should say that. But it's an incredible atmosphere, incredible. If you're into ultra running, it's definitely a bucket list race. Highly recommend it. There's like 1 million people watching. It's the biggest sporting event in South Africa, I believe, for the day. And because you're running point to point, you're going through all these different townships and so many people come out for it. It really just is an amazing experience. So I'll talk about that as well as how to tackle the hills on an uphill year. Again, I haven't run the down year. I don't know much about it, except it's reverse direction. It's a little longer though. It's a little longer when you run the down year. The finish line, they've changed it slightly over the years. You finish in different stadiums. Same thing with the uphill year. So it's not always exactly 89 kilometers or 55 miles. The hills that you hit, the iconic hills, the rolling hills, are pretty much the same though. And pavement hurts. Pavement hurts because it's hilly, so it's hard. 6,000 feet of climbing on an uphill year, about 2,000 meters, over 2,000 meters. It's over 6,000 feet of climbing. 4,000 feet of descent though. So I'll pull up some Strava data as well so you could kind of see how the elevation rolls and kind of how I paced it. But I'll talk about the experience starting with the starting line. All right, starting line at Comrades. It's crazy. I've only started in Durban because I've only done the up run, but you got 20,000 runners, it's early in the morning, it's dark out, you're downtown, in the streets. I've been lucky enough to get elite status, so I'm kind of near the front of the line, and I don't have to get out there as early, but people wait out there for hours. Big city marathon atmosphere, right? 20,000 runners, it's kind of uncomfortable. It could be pretty warm already, right? Heat is a big concern when you're running an ultra, especially even though it's not, full-blown summer down there, it could get relatively warm. And you're packed like sardines, and they do a lot of announcements, and it's part of the experience really. So that's crazy. The start is crazy. From the front end, my perspective, they go out extremely fast. There's time bonuses for being in the lead at certain checkpoints. Guys are extremely good. They're extremely competitive, right? A lot of really strong South African runners. So Max King and I in 2015, Max King, world champion at 100K, world mountain running champion, 214 marathoner, right? Max King, the legend. We go out together, we're running 5:50 the first mile, right? Course record pace. It's sub 6 minute mile pace. What is that in kilometers? Like 350, 340 something per kilometer pace, right? And this is slightly net uphill, and we got 55 miles to go, right? Course record pace. I look around at Max, and I say, Max, I think we're in about 300th place. there's 300 guys already ahead of us, and we started near the front, right? So guys go out extremely fast. A lot of people come back. And when you're going on the net uphill year, a lot of the major climbs happen in the first half of the race, right? The first marathon. And if you look at the Strava data there, you could kind of see the grade adjusted pace. You could see the hills of the elevation profile, my favorite thing to see. And you could see I came through the first marathon in about 243, 242, and it had thousands of feet of climbing, right? It's a very big uphill. Now, imagine on the downhill year, it's the opposite elevation profile, right? The big downhills happen in the second half of the race. Well, the uphill year, 2015, my better year there, I actually went out at about the same pace in 2019 and just bonked harder, basically. But there's a lot of climbing, and you have to pace yourself really well on those early climbs because it'll bite you later. And that's what's always happened to me after about 50K or 30 miles in this race. Now, after the first half, they say, you could be, if you just even split, it's a good race, even though the second half doesn't have nearly as much climbing. There's actually a pretty flattish section right after the halfway point where you could really roll if you have legs. That's where I've always fallen apart. I recommend going out slower, saving yourself on the initial climbs. Some previous female winners have even power hiked some of the climbs. You hit some pretty decent grades. A lot of the grades are only 5%, 6% grade, but there's somewhere it kicks up to like 10%. And there's some really long hills, like 3K type of climbs, 1.8 mile types of climbs, pretty early on, 15, 16 miles in. You're hitting these big climbs. The crowds are more exciting and more dense in the first half of the race, so you don't want to get too excited. Now, there's great aid station support. There's great aid station support because there's one every couple miles, it seems like, every couple kilometers, where you could be grabbing fluid, and they have these like plastic sachets that you rip open with your teeth, and you could suck down water or electrolyte drink, and they have things like food and calories you could also be taking in. So your hydration at these aid stations is very critical. And of course you just throw them in the garbage can, right? You don't have to carry a ton of stuff with you, but I did have a pack on with a lot of my Spring Energy gels, and I actually ran with a handheld as well. Some people wear the full Ultra vest, but there is aid station support. So if you have the time to be able to grab stuff on the fly, you could definitely make that work and be taking in your calories much like you would in any Ultra. But realize, because of the nature of the atmosphere, fast running pace, it's a road running ultra, you're running a lot faster than you would in a trail ultra, right? But it's still got a lot of climbing, it's not flat. So my advice would be pace yourself more early on in the first half, really try to capitalize on that second half. Now near the end you hit Polly Short's Hill, I believe it's called. It's very steep, it's very hard. My goal there was just not to walk. I think I probably did end up walking because I was really hurting. But that's a kicker of a hill. It's really steep. It's near the end. If you make it up that, you're going to be golden because it's kind of downhill, flattish to the finish, and it's not very far. But that hill is a tough one. The other thing with the second half of the course is that it gets lonely and isolated out there in terms of fan support, crowd support. You got all these people cheering in the first half, less people in the second half until you start getting close to the finish line. But if you're running with a bunch of other people around you, you're probably going to be surrounded with company pretty much the entire race. Like, it's a huge crowd. And the really special thing about Comrades is they have the cutoff. I'm not sure if it's like 12 hours or 15 hours or what it is, but the cutoff time where they absolutely will stop people 50 meters from the finish line. It's heartbreaking, it's dramatic. They'll be drawing a line, they'll have a line, and they'll cut you off if you don't finish under the cutoff. And a lot of people don't, because it's a tough race, and meltdowns occur. Like last year I had a pretty big meltdown. I was walking and stopping and sipping Coke and Coca-Cola. It was not a good picture, and it really hurts your legs, right? 55 miles, 89K on pavement really hurts. I've heard the down is much worse for the quad damage, so you gotta train for the hills. You gotta train like you're doing an ultra, like a trail mountain ultra, but you gotta train for the speed. It's a unique combination of things, and a really highly recommended type of race. When I did it that year in 2015, I was coming off the Boston Marathon. I think I did Boston a little too close, and we will talk about Boston here in a minute. I was a little too close to Boston. It was like 7 weeks after Boston. I was told not to race a hard marathon within 8 weeks of Comrades. It was a little risky. And part of my problem that year is I also, 6 weeks before Boston, I did the LA Marathon, US Championships. Got 8th place there, ran 2:20 on a hot day in LA on a hilly course, and then ran well at Boston, but then at Comrades I think I was just too tired. So, the legends of the sport, guys like Bruce Fordyce would say, don't race a lot of really hard marathons before Comrades. Of course, you have to run a marathon to qualify for Comrades, but you want to structure your training where you're putting in some big long runs, time on feet, more conservative, but then doing some tempo speed work and doing some hill work, up and down. Even though it's a net uphill race on the up run, there's still a lot of downhill. That always surprised me how much downhill there was. Same thing with the down year, there's still a lot of uphill, right? It's a 6,000, 4,000 split depending on which way you're going, right? And that's in feet. So it's rolling, it's a roller coaster, it's all on pavement. That's my advice for Comrades. Part two, the Boston Marathon. And again, I've done a video again on Boston. I'll link to it in the description below as well as at the end of this video. Boston's great. Again, net downhill race and a hilly marathon course. It could be extremely fast if you have a tailwind and good weather conditions. It could be extremely slow if you have a headwind and bad weather conditions. And you never know. Spring in New England, April in New England, really a volatile time with climate. It could be pouring down rain and freezing cold. It could be snowy. It could be 80 degrees Fahrenheit and super hot and muggy. Generally, for most people do not do well when it's a tailwind and it's hot because they get dried out, right? You don't drink enough, you get dehydrated. And the nature of Boston, because it's point to point, right? You're running from Hopkinton to downtown Boston. If the wind's blowing one direction, it's gonna kind of be blowing one direction. You make a slight change as you go into the Newton Hills, you kind of turn a little bit, but if the vectors of the wind are blowing at you, it could be rough. And I ran my best Boston in 2015. I dropped out of Boston when it was really cold and windy. 2015, it was also kind of cool. I wore a hat and gloves the whole time. It was a 15 mile an hour headwind, 10 mile an hour headwind. I ran 2:19:12, got 16th place. That was my best pace Boston. Before, I also ran bad at Boston in my first Boston. It was a perfect weather day, and I knew I was in trouble by mile 16. Now, Boston, because of the hills and the nature of the hills, this is important, you've got a big downhill start. That makes it more complicated. People start way too fast usually. First 5K is screaming downhill. First mile or first kilometer is really downhill, and then there's a little uphill, and then it's kind of a steady downhill. Even in that first 10 miles, that first 16K, people are rolling. They're trying to bank time. Don't try to bank time. You could go a little faster. I say, I tell athletes 10 seconds a mile, 6 seconds a kilometer faster than goal pace, because you got to take advantage of that downhill a little bit, right? You don't want to be going slower on the downhill, but people get really excited. They go 20 seconds a mile too fast, 15 seconds a kilometer too fast. They blow out their quads. Well, they don't know it until they get about 15, 16 miles in and they make the turn at the fire station into the Newton Hills, and boom, you have these uphills in the Newton Hills. 4 big hills that are between a quarter to half a mile long each. Steady uphills in the Newton Hills between miles 16 and 20. That's like 25K to 32K in the race. Critical time. If you're going to fall apart at Boston, that's where it usually happens. Things get amplified more because of the nature of the hills at Boston, because of the struggles with the weather. Otherwise, it would be like another marathon where you're worried about hitting the wall around mile 20, 32 kilometers in, right? So my advice at Boston, don't bank up too much time. You could go a little faster on that first downhill start in the first half of the race, but realize, you're going to lose that time, and it's okay. You'll lose that time in the Newton Hills probably, right? I always try to cancel out that downhill start with the Newton Hills, because if you banked a little bit, like I banked almost a minute in the first half, I positive split slightly, but I lost all my time by the time I got to the top of Heartbreak. That's okay, because if you still have legs when you get to mile 20, 21, the top of Heartbreak Hill, it's all downhill to the finish. And if you could roll that last 10K at Boston, and this goes with a lot of marathons, but especially Boston, if you could roll that last 10K even close to your average goal pace, you're going to be passing a lot of people probably. And again, if it's a tailwind day and it's hot and sunny and people are getting dehydrated, they're going to really slow down there, right? If it's cold and rainy and people get hypothermic, they're going to really slow down there. Generally, for most runners, it's better when it's cold conditions because the overheating issue is a big thing at a race like Boston, as well as preparing for the hills and the quad pounding from all that downhill start. So don't start too fast. Practice hill running for the Newton Hills. You got a lot of uphill there. And otherwise, then it's like any other marathon. But of course, Boston, a very special event, lifelong goal to qualify for, to participate in for a lot of people. It's got the history, it's got the prestige, just an amazing experience running Boston and running Comrades. So that's my talk on these courses. I'll do another talk probably on Pikes Peak. I got a lot of votes. Thanks to the Patreon supporters for really making this possible. Thanks to title sponsor Hoka One One for all their support. Any surface, any distance, living the dream over the years. Thanks to all those that purchase training plans and coaching through sagerunning.com. We sell plans from 5K, 10K, all the way up to ultra marathons. Getting ready for my mountain running season now this spring. Thank you again. Hope you're doing well, and stay tuned for more.